Hello everybody, welcome to a new tutorial from Sound for More. It's Leo speaking. Today I'm going to show you how you can create a simple drum pad which plays a kick drum in Swift inside Playgrounds. So before I start, I'd like to remind my viewers to subscribe as it helps with growing the channel. Thank you very much. So I'm inside Swift Playgrounds on an iPad. Let's create a new application like so, and let's call that why not simply drums. Okay, so just drums. Okay, and actually I already have something called like that, so let's just change that to drum pad like so. Okay, let's enter it, and let's actually get rid of this preview, and let's expand this view on the left hand side. So let's start. The first thing I want to do is to import the AVFoundation framework. You see you have the auto completion, which is quite nice as well. The next, we want to create a SamplePlayer class. And there are different ways to do this, of course, but this is just one example. So I'm going to create a variable called player, and I'm going to instantiate that from the AudioPlayer class like that. Okay, there you go. Next, what I want to do is create also another variable. Let's call it drum, why not, of type string. And this will contain the name of the sample which I want to load for my application bundle. And I'm going to include also another variable called volume. And I'm going to declare that of type float. And I'm going to initialize that to 0.5, so 0 to 1, 0.5. Okay, and then I'm going to declare a constant called sound or type URL, which will contain the bundle URL for the sound that I want to play. So I'm going to call the init constructor like so, and I'm going to call the bundle class the main one, main like so, and then I'm going to call for the URL, and then I'm going to select for this version here, and for resource it will be my drum variable, which I defined up here, called kick in this case, and with extension here we put the extension of a file or type wave, which I'm going to load in a moment. Okay, so that and what I'm going to do, actually I'm going to put an exclamation mark to ensure that I manage fail of loading. Okay, and I could have done that in a different way as well, but for the purpose of the tutorial, these will do. Next, I'm going to create a function called start. And inside this function, I want to try to initialize a player, which will be from the AVPlayer. And it will have the URL, which I have already initialized through the init constructor up there. Perfect. I'm going to set the player, the player volume to the volume variable, which I defined up here. And I will show you in a moment how I load that value from the content view. And then I'm going to say player play, like so. And that will play the sound which has been loaded, which will be a kick drum. Next, I'm going to create another function. I'm going to call it change volume. and I will pass a parameter called vol for volume, and it will be of type float, like so. And I open the curly braces, and I will assign that value to the variable called volume, like so. All right, so that should be enough as a class. So we have defined the number of variables. We have the constructor in it, which allows us to get the URL from the bundle. We have a start function, which will play the sound, will initialize the a player object, set the volume, then play. And then we have this function called change volume, which will grab the volume which is passed on as parameter and assign it to the local variable volume, so that in that case that will be used by the function start to set the volume. Okay, let's scroll down now and remove everything here. So let's remove all of that, like so, so that we are left with the struct content view and body only. Okay, inside, so I want to declare a couple of variables actually before I go into the body. So the first one will be, let's call it TG, but we can call it whatever you like. And we are going to initialize that class, which we have defined up here. Okay, so we create an instance and we give it the name TG, but you can call it whatever you like. And we're also going to create a state property type float. Let's call it volume 1, vol1, and type float for the volume, and we assign that also to an initialized value of 0.5. Okay, now it's time to create a bit of a UI. So I'm going to use the GeometryReader so that it gives me a little bit more control on my space. Okay, inside I'm going to use the geometry variable, like so, inside the GeometryReader. And then what I'm going to do, I'm going to create a button actually, and we are going to set the action of that button to why not to a function which does not contain anything for now. Perhaps we'll do something that later on. And after that, I'm going to open my curly braces again, and I'm going to have an h stack as a content, and inside that I'm going to have a text which will be saying kick for the kick drum that I want to actually press on. And then I'm going to define the content shape of that h stack. Okay, and I'm going to define it as, let's remove this bit, content shape, there you go. And I'm going to choose a shape of a rectangle so that I ensure that there is effectively a rectangle shape that fulfill that h stack, so I don't have to press only on the text which says kick. Okay, then I'm also going to define the frame size, and I'm going to choose the constructor, the signature, sorry, of the function. I'm going to set the width as the geometry variable, which will come from the GeometryReader. And I'm going to take the size from it, the width, and I'm going to divide that by 6. And I'm going to put a little bit of margin, so I'll put 5 in this case. As a height, I'm going to use again the geometry variable. I point to the size again, then the height again, and this time I'm going to divide it by 4 and then put a little bit of margin again. And then as an alignment, I'm going to set it to center, like so. Right. Next, what I want to do is, I just made a mistake here. Let me align these like so, because I have an arrow, so that arrow has gone away. Perfect. Then next, I'm going to override or use a function called button gesture. And the reason that I'm going to use this function is because it allowed me to grab the event when the button is pressed, when I have a touchdown instead of responding to a release of the button being pressed. And inside here, I'm going to check if the button has been pressed, like so. And if it has been pressed, I'm going to call the instance of the class I created above, and I'm going to call that variable called, sorry, that method called start, like so, so that it will play the sound. And then I'm not going to perform any additional action, so I'll leave these closed like that. But what I'm going to do, I'm going to set additional, if you like, formatting, which I think is important. Actually, I should have not done that. Here we go. So I'm going to set additional formatting like so, and I'm going to set the foreground color, and I'm going to choose that as white. Okay. Then I'm going to choose the background color. Sorry, the background. And I'm going to choose the color like that. Enter red, like so. Next, I'm going to give it a bit of a radius on the corners of the button, so like so. And I'm going to set that to 32. Why not? We can try. We can change it later on if that that doesn't work. And I'm just checking the errors. Yes, as value of type SamplePlayer as non-member start. I check that. Oh yeah, because it is uppercase, the S. Here we go. Perfect. Then next, what I'm going to do is to set the position of that button. On the X position, I'm going to call the geometry variable again, the size and the width, and I'm going to divide that by 6 and multiply by 2. So effectively 1/3 in terms of opposition. And then instead vertically, I'm going to choose again the geometry property, size, height, and I'm going to divide that by 6 and multiply by 3. So again, half in terms of height. Again, you can change that as you prefer, of course. Next, I'm going to add a slider, and the reason I'm going to add a slider is because I want to have a slider to set the volume. So I'm going to say that will have a value which will be driven by that property which we call the volume 1, and we'll have a range from 0 to 1.0, like so. Then we are going to open our function. We don't need anything else here. We are just going to call that function change volume inside the DG object that we created. We are going to pass that volume 1, vol1 as a state property. Finally, a couple of more things. We are going to do a scale effect, and we are going to change primarily vertically, going to multiply that by 2. We are going to scale it up by 2 so that it will get twice the height. And the anchor, we are going to set that to, why not, center. That will be fine. We're going to set the frame as well. And I'm going to use that signature function. So as a width, we're going to call our geometry variable object, and we're going to choose the width. There you go, divided by 6. Again, all of these you can customize them to your liking. The height I'm going to set 5, and alignment I'm going to put center. Why? Yeah, why not? And finally, we are going to adjust the position of that slider, and we're going to say that on the X position it will be following the width of the geometry reader, and we are going to divide that by 6 and multiply by 2 in lines to what we've done above. And from a Y position we are going to have it set to effectively the height. Why not divide 6 times 4? Hopefully that will means that it will be properly centered. So hopefully that that will give us what we need. Let's remove this thing that we don't need that, and now let's check for errors if we have done any errors. So it says here there is an error. Let's double check these. It says in replace Y with Y, which is actually correct, like so. And hopefully that would be it. So why not? Let's run this. Well, there is a crash, so let's stop that, and that's because I have not loaded my sample. So in this case, I have created a sample, which you can do it as you like. So I'm going to insert from a file this sample, which will be in my Sound for More audio files kick, like so, and it's called kick.wave. So let's run these again. And here we are. You have now a drum pad, which is called kick. Let's press it. You should be able to hear that kick sound. And if you increase the volume, yeah, it's going up. If I decrease the volume, yeah, it's going down. So perfect. So just to recap what we have done. So let's stop this. So we have imported the AVFoundation framework. We have created this class. I named it SamplePlayer. I created an object called player and I used the constructor AVAudioPlayer. I create a number of variables, one to contain the names of the sample that I'm loading, one to contain the volume, one to contain the URL that points to this WAV file here. Then I use the init constructor to get the URL from the bundle, from the main bundle, so that I have the URL for that kick.wave file. Then I have created a function called start, which create a player object using that URL, pointing to this WAV file, set the volume and played. And then I created a function called change volume, which take the volume from the main content view struct and assign that the volume value to the internal or local volume variable inside the SamplePlayer class. The user interface is very simple. So first of all, we have declare an instance of the SamplePlayer class and also a state variable called vol1 to keep the volume from the slider. And then we created a button here inside the GeometryReader. We use the GeometryReader to keep track of the absolute positions. I can precisely put the object on the UI. I created a button. There are no action in there, but then I defined in the main body an H stack which contain a text which will show kick. I defined the size of that H stack as a rectangle, so that I don't have, if you don't do that, you'll have to click precisely on the writing kick. Then I set the frame size and also the alignment to center, and then I used this internal function called button gesture, which allowed me to trigger the start method from the TG object, which come from the SamplePlayer class, which we defined earlier. And I triggered the start method, which will play the sound. Then I set the foreground color to white, so the text will be white, where it says kick, the background to red. Gave a little bit of corner radius, so the corners of that rectangle around it. I set the position, I created another slider, and I set to track the value of the slider to a state property called volume 1, and the range 0 to 1, and when anything changes in there, I call the change volume function of the TG object, which is the sample, which comes from the SamplePlayer class. And then I've done a little bit of formatting. I changed the height of that slider, the frame, and the position there, so that it is perfectly aligned as a width to the width of the button, and also sits below that button. And of course, when you click play, you have that nice button, and you can click anywhere, because I defined that rectangle area outside. You can see the corner radius there, nice. And then you have this slider, you see vertically is twice the size. Okay, I've applied that scale effect, and that when you change the value, it changes that state property, and in turn also calls that function inside the SamplePlayer class to change the local volume variable, so that the next time that you press on the button, it will load it will set the audio player object with the new volume value. So that's just one example. That's one way to do it, just using the internal frameworks provided by Apple. And in this way, you could create 3 or 4 or 9 or whatever you like. You could create a set of drum pads with different sounds, and you have a simple drum machine inside your Swift playgrounds in an iPad. So as you can see, it was very easy to actually create. I hope you enjoy the tutorial, and if you do, let me know. I went a little bit quick, perhaps didn't explain exactly everything in terms of a language, and I wanted to ensure that it would work straight away. So probably was paying a little bit more attention to that the code worked instead of explaining part by part. But after all, this is a tutorial on how to show you to create a kick drum pad, not to teach you how to program in Swift or SwiftUI. Anyway, see you in the next video. Thank you. Bye.